The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Brookside Middle School, casting long rectangular shadows across the polished linoleum floors. Students shuffled through the hallways in their usual chaotic rhythm, backpacks slung over shoulders, conversations bouncing off lockers, the familiar symphony of another Tuesday beginning. In room 214, Miss Harper stood at her desk, arranging papers for the day's lessons, her coffee still steaming in its ceramic mug. She'd been teaching 7th grade English for 11 years, and she prided herself on knowing her students. She knew who struggled with reading comprehension, who excelled at creative writing, who needed an extra moment of patience, and who just needed someone to listen. As the bell rang and students filed into her classroom, Ms. Harper glanced up with her usual warm smile, greeting each child by name. They settled into their seats with the usual scraping of chairs against tile, the rustling of notebooks being pulled from bags, the occasional groan about homework left undone. But as Ms. Harper scanned the room, her gaze landed on Zoey Marshall, and something made her pause. The 12-year-old girl stood beside her desk in the 3rd row, her hands resting stiffly on the desktop, her posture unnaturally rigid. Her brown hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her face held an expression that was difficult to read, somewhere between concentration and carefully controlled discomfort. "Zoey, honey, you can sit down now," Miss Harper said gently, nodding toward the empty chair. Zoey's eyes flickered toward her teacher, then quickly away. "I'm okay standing, Miss Harper." The response was quiet, almost rehearsed. Miss Harper felt a small furrow form between her brows, but decided not to press the issue. Perhaps Zoey just needed to stretch her legs. Kids were restless sometimes. She'd been teaching long enough to know that not every behavior required immediate intervention. So she began her lesson, discussing the short story they'd read for homework, asking questions, encouraging discussion. But throughout the entire 45-minute period, Zoey remained standing, her body barely moving, her hands never leaving the desk. When other students shifted in their seats, slouched, leaned back, or fidgeted with pencils, Zoey stood like a statue, only her eyes moving to follow Miss Harper around the room. When the bell rang for the next period, students gathered their belongings and streamed toward the door. Zoey moved carefully, almost mechanically, picking up her books without bending at the waist, keeping her torso perfectly straight as she walked out of the classroom. Miss Harper watched her go, that small seed of concern beginning to take root in her mind. The pattern continued over the next several days. Every single class period, Zoey stood beside her desk. She participated minimally when called upon, her answers brief and correct, but delivered with visible effort. During a particularly long writing assignment on Friday, Ms. Harper noticed Zoey's face growing pale, a thin sheen of perspiration forming on her forehead despite the cool air conditioning. The girl's knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of her desk, and her jaw was clenched so tightly that Ms. Harper could see the small muscles working beneath her skin. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy educational stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. By the following Monday, Ms. Harper had begun to compile mental notes. Zoey never sat. Not once. Not in her class, and according to casual conversations with other teachers in the break room, not in any of her other classes either. During lunch periods, Zoey stood at the end of a table in the cafeteria, barely touching her food. She'd pick at a sandwich or push fruit around on her tray, but she never actually consumed much of anything. Her eyes would dart around the room as if constantly monitoring who might be watching her. On Tuesday of that week, Ms. Harper decided to observe Zoey during recess. She stood near the gymnasium doors, watching as students poured onto the playground. Most immediately scattered toward the basketball courts, the swing sets, or clustered in groups to talk and laugh. Zoey walked slowly to the far fence line, the chain-link barrier that separated the playground from the parking lot beyond. She stood there, facing away from the other children, her arms wrapped around her midsection, her body as rigid as it had been in the classroom. Miss Harper's concern deepened. This wasn't just a quirk or a phase. Something was clearly wrong. She watched as one of Zoey's classmates, a boisterous boy named Marcus, ran past chasing a soccer ball. He didn't see Zoey in his peripheral vision, and his shoulder clipped hers as he sprinted by. The impact wasn't hard, just a glancing contact, but Zoey's reaction was immediate and alarming. She gasped sharply, her entire body going rigid, her hands flying to her sides. Her face contorted in pain, and she bent forward slightly before catching herself, forcing her body back upright. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously, glancing around to see if anyone had noticed. Miss Harper noticed. Her heart clenched with worry, and she immediately started walking toward Zoey. But the girl saw her coming and quickly turned away, moving along the fence line to put distance between them. By the time Ms. Harper reached the spot where Zoey had been standing, the girl had positioned herself near a group of other students, trying to blend in, trying to look normal. But Ms. Harper could see the way Zoey held herself. The way her breathing seemed shallow and controlled, the way she wouldn't allow her body to relax even for a moment. When recess ended and students filed back inside, Ms. Harper made a decision. She couldn't ignore this anymore. Something was happening to Zoey Marshall, and as her teacher, as an adult responsible for her well-being during school hours, she had an obligation to find out what it was. She waited until her planning period that afternoon and then walked down to the main office, requesting to speak with the school nurse, Mrs. Chen. Mrs. Chen was a practical woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She'd worked at Brookside for almost as long as Miss Harper had been teaching there, and the two women had developed a mutual respect over the years. When Miss Harper explained her observations about Zoey, Mrs. Chen's expression grew serious. "How long has this been going on?" Mrs. Chen asked, pulling up Zoey's file on her computer. "I first noticed it about a week and a half ago," Ms. Harper replied, "but talking to other teachers, it seems like it's been longer than that. Maybe 3 weeks total." Mrs. Chen scrolled through her records. "She hasn't come to see me at all this year, not once. No complaints of illness, no injuries reported." She looked up at Ms. Harper. "You think she's hurt?" "I think something is very wrong," Ms. Harper said carefully. "The way she moves, or rather doesn't move, it's like she physically can't bend. And when that student bumped into her today at recess, the pain on her face was real. I'm not imagining this." "I believe you," Mrs. Chen said immediately. "I've learned to trust teacher instincts. You see these kids every day. You know when something's off." She drummed her fingers on her desk, thinking, "We should bring her in, talk to her. If she's injured and hiding it, we need to know why." "She's going to be resistant," Miss Harper warned. "I've tried to approach her gently a few times, ask if she's okay, and she shuts down immediately. Says she's fine, then finds a way to avoid further conversation." "Then we'll need to be careful," Mrs. Chen said. "Let me check with Principal Morrison first, make sure we're following proper protocol. But yes, I think we need to have a conversation with Zoey. Today, if possible." An hour later, Miss Harper was back in her classroom, teaching her final period of the day, when there was a gentle knock on her door. Mrs. Chen stood in the hallway, and beside her was Ms. Rodriguez, the school counselor. Miss Harper excused herself and stepped into the hall, pulling the door partially closed behind her. "We've talked to the principal," Ms. Rodriguez said in a low voice. "We'd like to speak with Zoey after school before she leaves for the day. Can you ask her to come to the nurse's office? We think it might be less intimidating if the request comes from you, someone she knows and sees every day." Ms. Harper nodded. "Of course, I'll bring her down myself." When the final bell rang 20 minutes later, students erupted from their seats in the usual rush toward freedom. Ms. Harper waited for the initial surge to clear, then approached Zoe's desk. The girl was gathering her books slowly, moving with that same careful, controlled precision that had become her signature over the past weeks. "Zoe," Miss Harper said softly. "Mrs. Chen asked if you could stop by the nurse's office before you head home. Nothing to worry about, just a quick check-in." Zoe's eyes widened, and something that looked like panic flashed across her face. "I can't. I need to get home. My mom is expecting me." "It'll only take a few minutes," Ms. Harper assured her. "I'll walk with you, and we can call your mom from the office to let her know you might be a few minutes late." "No," Zoe said, her voice rising slightly. "Please, Ms. Harper, I'm fine. I don't need to see the nurse. I'm not sick." "Honey, we're just concerned about you," Ms. Harper said gently. "You haven't been yourself lately, and we want to make sure everything's okay. That's all." Zoe's hands trembled as she clutched her books against her chest. Her eyes darted toward the door, then back to Ms. Harper, and for a moment it looked like she might bolt. But then her shoulders sagged slightly, and something in her expression crumbled. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I can't. She'll be so mad." The words sent a chill down Ms. Harper's spine. "Who will be mad, Zoe?" But the girl had already shut down again, her face going blank, her jaw setting in that familiar tight line. "Never mind, I'll go see Mrs. Chen, but I can't stay long." They walked to the nurse's office in silence, Zoe's footsteps careful and measured, her body rigid with each step. Miss Harper's mind was racing with possibilities, each one more troubling than the last. When they entered the small medical suite, Mrs. Chen and Ms. Rodriguez were waiting, their expressions professionally neutral, but their eyes warm with concern. "Hi, Zoe," Mrs. Chen said with a gentle smile. "Thank you for coming to see us. Why don't we sit down and chat for a minute?" "I'd rather stand," Zoe said immediately, positioning herself near the wall, as far from the examination table as the small room would allow. The three adults exchanged glances. Ms. Rodriguez pulled over a rolling stool and sat down, deliberately positioning herself at a lower eye level than Zoe, a counseling technique meant to make the child feel less threatened. "Zoe, we've noticed that you seem uncomfortable lately. Your teachers have mentioned that you're not sitting in class, and we're worried that you might be hurt or in pain." "I'm not hurt," Zoe said, but her voice lacked conviction. Her hands had moved to wrap around her waist again, holding her midsection as if protecting something precious or painful. "Sweetheart, it's okay to tell us if something's wrong," Mrs. Chen said, moving slowly toward her medical cabinet to retrieve some basic supplies. "That's what we're here for, to help you feel better. But we can't help if we don't know what's going on." Zoe's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back fiercely, her jaw trembling with the effort of holding back emotion. "You can't help. Nobody can help. And if I tell you, it'll just make everything worse." Miss Harper felt her heart breaking. She'd seen students struggle with difficult home situations before, but something about Zoe's fear was particularly acute, particularly desperate. "Zoe, has someone hurt you? Are you afraid of someone?" The girl's breath hitched and a single tear escaped, tracking down her cheek. "I can't bend," she whispered finally. "I can't sit down because it hurts too much, and I can't take it off because she checks. She always checks." The room fell silent. Mrs. Chen took a careful step closer. "What can't you take off, Zoe?" But Zoe was shaking her head now, backing further against the wall, her entire body trembling. "I shouldn't have said anything. I need to go home. I need to go right now." "Zoe, please," Ms. Rodriguez said calmly but firmly. "We can't let you leave if we think you're in danger. I know that's scary, and I know you're worried about what will happen. But we're adults who care about you, and our job is to keep you safe. Whatever is happening, we need to understand it so we can help you." "You don't understand," Zoey sobbed, the tears flowing freely now. "It's for my own good. She says it's to help me, to make me better. For ballet. For my future. I have auditions coming up, and I have to be perfect. My posture has to be perfect." Mrs. Chen's expression shifted, a mixture of confusion and growing alarm crossing her features. "Zoey, what does your mother make you wear?" The girl's resistance was crumbling, exhaustion and pain and fear all combining to break down the walls she'd built to protect her secret. Her voice came out small and broken. "The brace. She made a brace to fix my posture, to keep my back straight and my shoulders back, so I'll look perfect when I dance." Miss Harper felt the blood drain from her face. "You're wearing a brace right now, under your clothes." Zoey nodded miserably, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Mrs. Chen moved quickly but carefully, her professional training taking over. "Zoey, I need to see what's under your uniform. I need to check if you're injured. I'm a nurse, and this is my job, okay? I promise I'm just going to look, and I'm going to be very gentle." "No," Zoey whimpered, but there was no force behind the word. "You can't. She'll know. She'll be able to tell if anyone touched it." "Honey, if you're hurt, we have to help you," Ms. Harper said, moving to stand beside Zoey, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. The girl flinched at the contact but didn't pull away. "Whatever happens after, we'll deal with it, but right now, in this moment, we need to make sure you're okay." Zoey's face crumpled completely, and she began to cry in earnest, deep sobs that shook her rigid frame. "It hurts so much," she gasped between breaths. "It hurts all the time. I can't sleep. I can barely breathe. And I'm so tired. I'm so tired." Mrs. Chen knelt down in front of her, looking up into her face. "Then let us help you. Let us take away the thing that's hurting you. That's all we want to do right now. Just take away the pain." After a long moment, Zoey nodded, her chin trembling. "Okay," she whispered, "but please don't tell my mom you saw. Please just say I told you. I don't want her to know you looked." "We'll figure all that out," Ms. Rodriguez assured her. "Right now, we just need to take care of you." Mrs. Chen guided Zoey to the examination table, though the girl couldn't actually sit on it. Instead, she stood beside it, gripping the edge with white-knuckled hands. "I'm going to lift your shirt, Zoey, just enough to see what's going on. You tell me if anything I do makes the pain worse, okay?" Zoey nodded, squeezing her eyes shut. Her whole body tensed in anticipation of pain or discovery or both. Mrs. Chen's hands were steady and practiced as she reached for the hem of Zoey's school uniform polo shirt. She lifted it slowly, revealing first a few inches of skin, then more, and then something that made all three adults audibly gasp. Wrapped around Zoey's torso, extending from just below her ribcage to her hips, was a crude, homemade contraption that looked like something from a nightmare. Thick pieces of cardboard had been cut to fit the curves of her body, held in place by layers and layers of silver duct tape that wrapped completely around her small frame. Plastic rods, the kind used for hanging closet organizers, had been taped vertically along her spine and sides, creating a rigid cage that prevented any bending or twisting. Zip ties cinched the apparatus tighter in places, digging into her flesh, creating deep red grooves in her skin. But worst of all was what the device had done to her body underneath. Where the edges of the cardboard pressed against her skin, there were angry red marks, some abraded and weeping clear fluid, others scabbed over from days or weeks of constant friction. Bruises bloomed in purple and yellow patches across her ribs and around her sides where the contraption had pressed relentlessly against bone. Several areas showed signs of early infection, the skin hot and inflamed, with small pustules forming around the zip tie marks. Zoe's breathing was rapid and shallow, her chest unable to expand fully with the constraint wrapped so tightly around her. "Oh my God," Ms. Harper breathed, her hand flying to cover her mouth. She felt suddenly dizzy, her mind unable to fully process what she was seeing. This wasn't a medical brace. This was torture. This was a device designed to control and constrain, with no thought given to the damage it was causing or the pain it was inflicting. Mrs. Chen's professional mask slipped for just a moment, her face reflecting horror and fury in equal measure before she regained control. "Zoe, sweetheart, how long have you been wearing this?" "3 weeks," Zoe whispered, her eyes still closed, tears streaming down her face. "She puts it on before school and checks it when I get home. I wear it when I sleep. I've only been allowed to take it off twice for less than 10 minutes each time so I could shower. But she watches to make sure I don't stay off too long." "This is causing serious harm to your body," Mrs. Chen said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Your skin is infected in multiple places. You have deep tissue bruising, and this is restricting your breathing, which is dangerous. We need to remove this immediately." "She'll know," Zoe sobbed. "She always knows, and then I'll have to wear it even longer. She said I have to learn discipline. She said all the great dancers had to suffer for their art. She said I'm weak if I complain." Ms. Rodriguez had pulled out her phone and was taking photographs of the device and Zoe's injuries, documenting everything with methodical precision. Her jaw was tight, her movements controlled, but Ms. Harper could see the fury in her eyes. "Zoe, what your mother is doing to you is not discipline. It's not training. This is abuse, and it's against the law. She's hurting you, badly. And we cannot let this continue." "But ballet is all I have," Zoe cried. "If I don't get into the academy, if I don't make it, then all of this pain will have been for nothing, and she'll be so disappointed. She gave up everything for me. She works 2 jobs to pay for my lessons. I can't let her down. I just have to get through the auditions. Just a few more weeks." "No," Mrs. Chen said firmly, already reaching for scissors to begin cutting through the duct tape. "Not even 1 more minute. This ends right now." She looked at Ms. Rodriguez. "Call CPS, now. And we need to call 911. I want a medical evaluation done at the hospital. These infections could turn serious if they're not treated properly." As Mrs. Chen worked to carefully cut away the layers of tape, Zoe whimpered with each movement, her body so accustomed to the rigid constraint that even the promise of freedom was painful. The process took nearly 20 minutes, Mrs. Chen working with painstaking care to ensure she didn't cause further injury as she removed each layer. The cardboard came away sticky with sweat and blood in places where the edges had cut into skin. The plastic rods had left deep impressions in Zoe's back. The zip ties had bitten so deeply that removing them revealed raw, weeping wounds. When the last piece of the device was finally removed, Zoe's legs buckled, and both Ms. Harper and Ms. Rodriguez rushed to support her, helping her to sit on the examination table. The girl gasped as her body was allowed to bend for the first time in weeks, the sensation clearly both relieving and painful. Her hands went to her ribs, touching the damaged skin gingerly as if she couldn't quite believe the constraint was gone. "I can breathe," she whispered in wonder, taking a deep, full breath for the first time. Then she immediately winced as her bruised ribs protested the expansion. "It hurts, but I can actually breathe." Mrs. Chen was cleaning the wounds with antiseptic solution, working methodically to address each area of damage. "You're going to be sore for quite a while," she said gently. "These are significant injuries. But you're going to heal. Your body is going to recover, and you're never going to wear that thing again. I promise you that." There was a knock on the door, and Principal Morrison entered, his face grave. He'd been briefed on the situation by Ms. Rodriguez's text messages. Behind him came Officer Mendoza, the school resource officer, his expression shifting from curiosity to shock as he took in the scene. The crying child, the destroyed remains of the homemade brace lying in pieces on the counter, the photographs on Ms. Rodriguez's phone, the wounds being tended by the nurse. "I've called Child Protective Services," Principal Morrison said quietly. "They're sending someone immediately. I've also contacted our district legal counsel. They'll be here within the hour." He looked at Zoey with infinite sadness. "I'm so sorry this happened to you. We should have seen this sooner. We should have protected you better." Officer Mendoza approached carefully, keeping his voice low and non-threatening. "Zoey, I need to ask you some questions, okay? I know you're scared and you're hurting, but I need to understand exactly what's been happening so we can make sure you're safe." Over the next 40 minutes, with Mrs. Chen continuing to treat her injuries and Ms. Harper holding her hand, Zoey told her story. It came out in fits and starts, interrupted by tears and long pauses. But eventually, the full picture emerged. Her mother, Grace Marshall, was a former dancer whose career had ended after a knee injury in her early 20s. She'd poured all her unfulfilled ambitions into her daughter, enrolling Zoey in ballet classes from the age of 4. At first, it had been fun, something Zoey enjoyed. But as she got older and showed real talent, her mother's expectations had grown increasingly demanding. The practices had grown longer, sometimes 4 or 5 hours after school. Her mother had pulled her from most extracurricular activities and limited her friendships, saying other children were distractions from her training. Zoey's diet had been strictly controlled, every calorie monitored and counted. But it was 3 weeks ago that things had taken a darker turn. Her mother had come home from work one evening with materials from a hardware store and announced that she'd found the solution to Zoey's posture problem. She said she'd watched videos online about how dancers in Russia trained, Zoey explained, her voice hoarse from crying. She said they had to learn to hold their bodies perfectly still, perfectly straight, and that's what would set me apart from other dancers. She said the auditions for the Valley Performing Arts Academy were in 1 month, and this was the only way I'd be good enough. The first time Grace had put the device on her daughter, Zoey had begged her to remove it, saying it hurt too much. Grace had responded by adding another hour to that evening's practice session, forcing Zoey to hold ballet positions while wearing the brace, saying she needed to learn that pain was temporary, but greatness was forever. When Zoey had tried to remove it herself that first night, unable to sleep because of the discomfort, Grace had discovered her attempt and had added the zip ties, making the device impossible for Zoey to remove without scissors. "She checked it every morning before school and every evening when I got home," Zoey said. "She'd feel around the edges to make sure nothing had been loosened or moved. If I complained or cried, she'd make me wear it longer. She said I was ungrateful, that she was sacrificing everything for me, and the least I could do was show some dedication." Officer Mendoza had been taking detailed notes, his expression growing darker with each revelation. "Did your mother ever strike you, hit you, or physically punish you in other ways?" Zoey shook her head. "Not really. She'd grab my arms sometimes when she was angry, hard enough to leave marks, but she never hit me with a closed fist or anything. She always said violence was beneath us. But she'd yell a lot. She'd tell me I was weak, that I'd never amount to anything if I couldn't handle a little discomfort. She'd compare me to other dancers, tell me about girls younger than me who trained harder and complained less." The door opened again, and a woman in her 30s entered, introducing herself as Detective Sarah Williams from the Child Abuse Unit. She'd been called in by CPS as the case had been flagged as potentially severe. She listened as Officer Mendoza brought her up to speed, her face remaining professionally neutral as she examined the photographs and the physical evidence of the brace. "We're going to need the names and contact information for any other adults in Zoey's life," Detective Williams said. Father, other relatives, family friends, anyone who might have information about the home environment. My dad left when I was 6, Zoey said quietly. I haven't seen him since. My grandparents live in Florida. We talk to them on the phone sometimes, but they haven't visited in over a year. Mom doesn't really have friends. She works at a pharmacy during the day and cleans offices at night to pay for my ballet lessons. What about your ballet instructor? Ms. Rodriguez asked. Surely they would have noticed something. Zoe's expression flickered with something complicated, a mixture of guilt and defensiveness. Miss Elena is wonderful. She never asked for any of this. Mom always made me change into my dance clothes in the car before we went into the studio and change back in the car after. She said it saved time, but really, it was so Miss Elena wouldn't see the brace, and I got really good at hiding how much pain I was in during class. I'd smile and do my positions, even though every movement felt like I was being stabbed. You're a very brave girl, Detective Williams said gently. But you shouldn't have had to hide this. No child should have to endure this kind of treatment, regardless of the reason. What your mother did wasn't training or discipline. It was torture. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Miss Harper squeezed Zoe's hand, feeling the girl's fingers trembling in her grip. She thought about all those days watching Zoe stand in her classroom, never suspecting the full extent of what was happening beneath the surface. The guilt was crushing. How many small signs had she missed? How many times had Zoe been silently screaming for help, while everyone around her just assumed she was being quirky or difficult? An ambulance had arrived, and paramedics were now consulting with Mrs. Chen about Zoe's condition. They agreed that she needed to be taken to the hospital for a complete medical evaluation and treatment of her infections. The CPS caseworker, a tired-looking woman named Patricia Green, arrived as the paramedics were preparing to transport Zoe. I'm going to need to interview the mother, Patricia said, reviewing the initial report on her tablet. Based on what I'm seeing here, this is an immediate removal situation. Zoe will not be going home today. She'll be placed in emergency foster care once she's discharged from the hospital. Can Ms. Harper come with me? Zoe asked suddenly, panic rising in her voice again. To the hospital? Please, I don't want to be alone. Ms. Harper looked to Principal Morrison, who nodded immediately. Absolutely. Take the rest of the day. Take tomorrow if you need to. We'll get coverage for your classes. I'll be right there with you, Ms. Harper promised, squeezing Zoe's hand again. Every step of the way. As the paramedics wheeled Zoe out on a gurney, her body finally allowed to lie down flat, Detective Williams and Officer Mendoza were making plans to visit Grace Marshall at her workplace. They would confront her there, at the pharmacy, rather than waiting for her to arrive at home and discover Zoe missing. It would be safer, more controlled, with witnesses present if she became volatile. The ride to the hospital was quiet, Zoe drifting in and out of consciousness as the pain medication the paramedics had administered began to take effect. Miss Harper sat beside the gurney in the ambulance, watching the girl's face relax for the first time in what must have been weeks. Without the rigid control she'd been maintaining, Zoe looked even younger than her 12 years, fragile and vulnerable. A child who should have been worried about math tests and friendship drama, not surviving abuse disguised as ambition. At the hospital, Zoe was taken immediately into an examination room where a pediatric emergency physician named Dr. Alvarez conducted a thorough assessment. He documented every injury, every mark, every sign of the prolonged trauma her body had endured. X-rays were taken to check for rib fractures or other skeletal damage. Blood tests were run to check for infection markers. The infected areas were cleaned and treated with topical antibiotics. Throughout it all, Ms. Harper stayed close, offering comfort and reassurance, being the stable adult presence Zoe desperately needed. Dr. Alvarez's report was damning. Zoey had 3 cracked ribs, likely from the pressure of the brace combined with her continued dance activities. She had 11 separate areas of skin infection, 4 of which were severe enough to require oral antibiotics and close monitoring. She was dehydrated and malnourished, her body having struggled to function properly under such constant stress. She had muscle atrophy in her core, her body having relied on the external brace rather than her own muscles to maintain posture. Her lung capacity was reduced, her body having adapted to taking shallow breaths to minimize pain. She's going to need physical therapy, Dr. Alvarez told Ms. Harper quietly while Zoey dozed fitfully on the examination table. Her body has been compensating for this device for weeks. She's going to have to relearn how to move properly, how to use her core muscles, even how to breathe fully. And that's just the physical recovery. The psychological impact of this kind of prolonged abuse, the betrayal by her own mother, that's going to take a lot longer to heal. Will she be able to dance again? Ms. Harper asked. If she still wants to. Dr. Alvarez considered the question carefully. Physically, with time and proper rehabilitation, probably yes. Whether she'll want to after all this, after having something she loved weaponized against her, that's a different question. That's something she'll need to work through with a good therapist. Detective Williams arrived at the hospital just as Dr. Alvarez was finishing his examination. She had news. Grace Marshall had been arrested at her workplace without incident. When confronted with the allegations and shown photographs of her daughter's injuries, Grace had initially denied everything, claiming Zoey was lying, that she was an ungrateful child making up stories for attention. But when presented with the physical evidence, with the homemade brace itself and the medical documentation, her story had changed. She'd begun to cry, claiming she'd only been trying to help her daughter succeed, that she'd seen similar training methods used by elite dancers, that she'd never meant to hurt anyone. She's claiming it was all for Zoey's own good, Detective Williams said, disgust evident in her voice despite her professional demeanor. That every great artist has to suffer for their craft. She genuinely seems to believe that what she did was a form of tough love, preparing her daughter for a competitive world. That's insane, Ms. Harper said. That's not love. That's not even close to love. No, it's not, Detective Williams agreed. It's abuse rationalized through the lens of ambition. We see it sometimes in sports families, in performing arts families, anywhere there's a parent living vicariously through their child's achievements. But this case is particularly egregious. The deliberate infliction of pain, the ignoring of obvious injury, the complete disregard for the child's well-being in favor of some fantasy about future success. She's been charged with first-degree child abuse, unlawful restraint, and reckless endangerment. Depending on how the DA proceeds, she could be looking at significant prison time. Patricia Green, the CPS caseworker, had also arrived and was making arrangements for Zoey's placement. I have a foster home lined up, she told Ms. Harper. The Hendersons. They're experienced with trauma cases, and they don't have any other children in placement right now, so Zoey will have their full attention. They live about 15 minutes from here. Once she's discharged, probably tomorrow morning, we'll take her there. Ms. Harper felt tears prick her eyes. The idea of Zoey going to strangers, of not being there to continue supporting her through this, was painful. But she knew it was necessary. Zoey needed professional care, a stable environment, people trained to help children heal from trauma. Still, she made Patricia promise to give her the address, to allow her to visit, to stay connected to this child who had somehow become so important to her over the course of one terrible afternoon. When Zoey woke an hour later, the sky outside the hospital windows was growing dark. She looked around in confusion before her eyes landed on Ms. Harper, still sitting in the chair beside her bed. Relief flooded her face. You stayed. Of course I stayed, Miss Harper said, reaching over to brush a strand of hair from Zoe's forehead. I promised I would, didn't I? Zoe's eyes filled with tears again, but they seemed different from before. Less desperate, less frightened, just sad and tired and overwhelmed. They arrested her, didn't they? My mom? Yes, they did, Miss Harper said gently, deciding honesty was the best approach. What she did to you was against the law, Zoe. She hurt you very badly, even if she convinced herself she was helping you. I know, Zoe whispered. Part of me knew it was wrong the whole time, but she's my mom. She's all I have. And she really did sacrifice so much for me. The lessons are expensive. She works all the time. She gave up dating, gave up having any kind of life, just to focus on my training. Doesn't that mean she loves me? Miss Harper felt her heart break a little more. Love doesn't hurt, sweetie. Real love, healthy love, it protects you. It keeps you safe. It wants you to be happy, not just successful. Your mother may have convinced herself that what she was doing was love, but love doesn't strap a child into a torture device. Love doesn't ignore a child's pain. What your mother felt, what she was expressing, that was something else, something broken. Will I ever see her again? Zoe asked, her voice very small. I don't know, Miss Harper answered honestly. That's going to be up to the courts, to CPS, to a lot of people whose job it is to figure out what's best for you. But right now, your job is just to heal, to let your body get better, to rest, to be a kid for a while without all that pressure. I don't even know how to be just a kid anymore, Zoe said with a bitter little laugh that sounded far too old for a 12-year-old. Everything has been about ballet for so long. Wake up. Go to school, go to practice, come home, do homework, practice more, sleep, repeat. I don't have hobbies. I don't really have friends. I don't know who I am without dance. Then maybe this is your chance to find out, Miss Harper suggested gently. Not saying you have to give up ballet forever if you don't want to, but maybe you can figure out if you actually love it for yourself, or if you only loved it because it was what your mother wanted. Maybe you can discover what else makes you happy. Zoe was quiet for a long moment, processing this idea. The weird thing is, I think I did love it once, when I was little, before it became about auditions and competitions and being perfect. I loved the music. I loved the way it felt to move across the floor, like flying almost. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being fun and started being work. Started being scary because if I wasn't good enough, if I made a mistake, then I was letting her down. And disappointing her was the worst thing I could imagine. You never disappointed her, Ms. Harper said firmly. You could never disappoint anyone just by being yourself, by having limits, by being human. Any disappointment she felt was about her own failed dreams, not about anything you did or didn't do. You have to know that. You have to believe that. A nurse came in to check Zoe's vitals and adjust her IV fluids. She smiled warmly at the girl, complimenting her bravery, telling her she was doing great. After she left, Zoe turned back to Miss Harper with a question that had clearly been weighing on her mind. What happens now? Where do I go when I leave here? Miss Harper explained about the foster placement, about the Hendersons, about how CPS would be overseeing her care while everything got sorted out. She watched Zoe's face carefully as she spoke, seeing fear and uncertainty, but also, maybe, a tiny bit of relief. The relief of not having to go back to that house, to that constant pressure, to that pain. Will I have to go to a different school? Zoe asked. I don't think so, Miss Harper said. The foster home is in our district. You should be able to stay at Brookside, keep the same teachers, the same routine. Some stability while everything else is changing. Will you still be my teacher? Absolutely, and even if for some reason the placement changes and you do have to switch schools, I'll still check on you. I'll still be here if you need to talk. You're stuck with me now, kiddo." For the first time since this whole ordeal had begun, Zoey smiled. It was small and tentative, but it was real. "Thank you, Miss Harper, for noticing, for caring enough to ask questions. I don't think anyone else would have." "I think you'd be surprised," Miss Harper said. "There are a lot of people who care about you, who would have helped if they'd known what was happening. The important thing is that you're safe now. That's what matters." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, the beeping of monitors and distant sounds of the hospital creating an oddly peaceful backdrop. Zoey's eyes grew heavy as the exhaustion of the day, combined with the pain medication, began to pull her towards sleep. Just before she drifted off, she murmured, "Do you think I'm weak for not being able to handle the training?" "Oh, honey, no," Miss Harper said immediately. "You're the strongest person I know. You survived something horrific, and you're still here. You're still fighting. That's not weakness. That's incredible strength. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." Zoey's eyes closed, and within moments, her breathing had evened out into sleep. Miss Harper sat watching her for a long time, this brave, broken child who had suffered in silence for so long. She thought about all the Zoeys out there, all the children enduring abuse behind closed doors, hidden behind smiles and excuses, and the assumption that parents always know best and always want what's right for their kids. Most of the time, that was true, but sometimes it wasn't, and recognizing the difference could literally save a life. Dr. Alvarez returned around 8 that evening to check on his patient one more time before his shift ended. He found Miss Harper still sitting vigil, and he pulled up a chair beside her. "She's going to be okay," he said quietly. "It's going to take time, but she's young, and kids are resilient. With proper care and support, she'll recover from this." "What about the psychological scars?" Ms. Harper asked. "How do you recover from your own mother torturing you?" "That's the harder part," Dr. Alvarez admitted. "She's going to need therapy, probably long-term. She's going to have to work through feelings of betrayal, guilt, confusion about what love means and what family should be. She might have PTSD symptoms. She'll probably struggle with trusting adults, with believing that people can care about her without wanting something in return. But with the right support, she can get through it. I've seen kids survive worse and come out the other side. Not unscathed, but whole. Different, but still themselves." Miss Harper nodded, absorbing this information. "I want to help however I can. I want to be there for her." "That's good," Dr. Alvarez said. "She's going to need consistent, caring adults in her life who aren't asking anything of her except that she be okay. You can be that person. Just show up. Keep showing up." Sometimes that's the most healing thing of all. The next morning, Zoey was discharged from the hospital with prescriptions for antibiotics and pain medication, detailed instructions for wound care, and appointments already scheduled with a physical therapist and a child psychologist. Patricia Green arrived with the Hendersons, a couple in their late 40s who had been foster parents for over a decade. Tom Henderson was a high school history teacher, and his wife Rachel was a pediatric nurse. They approached Zoey with gentle kindness, not overwhelming her with too much attention, just offering quiet reassurance that they were there to help in whatever way she needed. Miss Harper had brought a change of clothes from her own closet, soft sweatpants and a loose t-shirt that wouldn't irritate Zoey's healing wounds. As Zoey changed out of the hospital gown, she moved carefully, her body still learning how to bend again after weeks of forced rigidity. Every movement was deliberate, and Ms. Harper could see her wince when she twisted certain ways or reached too far. "It's going to take some time," Rachel Henderson said, noticing Zoey's difficulty. "Your body needs to remember how to move naturally, but we'll help you. We'll take it slow." The drive to the Henderson home was quiet. Zoey sat in the back seat, staring out the window at the passing neighborhoods, her face unreadable. Miss Harper followed in her own car, having gotten permission to come along for this first transition. When they arrived at a modest single-story house with a well-maintained yard and a porch swing, Zoe seemed to relax slightly. It looked normal, comfortable, not threatening. Inside, Rachel showed Zoe to her room. It was painted a soft blue, with simple furniture and a comfortable-looking bed covered in a cheerful quilt. There were empty shelves waiting to be filled with whatever belongings Zoe might accumulate, bare walls ready for posters or pictures if she wanted them. A window looked out onto the backyard where birds were visiting a feeder. "This is your space," Rachel explained. "Your safe space. You can decorate it however you want, and if you need time alone, just close the door. We'll respect that. But we're also right down the hall if you need anything at all, day or night." Zoe nodded, taking it all in. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for taking me in. I know this is a lot." "You're not a burden, sweetheart," Tom said from the doorway. "This is what we do. This is what we want to do. Help kids who need a safe place to land for a while." Ms. Harper stayed for another hour, helping Zoe settle in, making sure she felt comfortable with the Hendersons before leaving her there. When it was finally time to go, Zoe walked her to the door, moving slowly but without the rigid terror that had characterized her movements for weeks. "You're going to come visit, right?" Zoe asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. "Of course," Ms. Harper assured her. "I'll check with CPS about the visitation schedule, but yes, I'll come see you, and you'll be back at school soon. You'll see me every day in class." "What will the other kids think?" Zoe asked suddenly. "Everyone's going to know something happened. They're going to ask questions." "You don't have to tell anyone anything you don't want to," Misty Harper said. "What you share about your experience, that's entirely up to you, but I'll make sure the staff knows to give you privacy, to shut down any gossip. You've been through enough without having to deal with middle school drama on top of it." Zoe managed a small smile at that. "Middle school drama is the worst." "It really is," Ms. Harper agreed, pulling the girl into a gentle hug, careful of her injuries. "But you're tougher than any drama. You're tougher than you even know yet. Remember that." As Ms. Harper drove home that evening, she felt emotionally exhausted, but also strangely hopeful. Yes, Zoe had been through something terrible. Yes, the road ahead would be difficult. But she'd survived. She'd been seen, she'd been heard, and she'd been removed from danger. That was more than a lot of children in similar situations could say. And now she had a chance, a real chance, to heal and to figure out who she was beyond her mother's ambitions. Over the next several weeks, a new routine established itself. Zoe returned to school after a week of rest and medical appointments. Ms. Harper had briefed the staff, asking for their discretion and their patience. When Zoe walked into room 214 for the first time since her rescue, the entire class went quiet. Some students had heard rumors, whispered stories about Zoe being taken away by CPS, about her mother being arrested. But Ms. Harper had prepared them with a simple statement. Zoe had been dealing with a private family situation, and she deserved their respect and kindness as she readjusted to school. For the most part, the students complied. There were a few who tried to ask intrusive questions, but Miss Harper shut those down quickly, and Zoe herself seemed different. She sat in her chair now, able to bend and move naturally, though she still occasionally winced when she twisted wrong or bumped into something. She participated in class more, her voice growing stronger as the days passed. She even smiled sometimes, particularly when Ms. Harper would catch her eye and give her an encouraging nod. The legal proceedings moved forward with bureaucratic slowness. Grace Marshall had pleaded not guilty initially, maintaining that she'd been helping her daughter train, that Zoe was exaggerating her injuries, that this was all a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by overzealous school officials. But as the evidence mounted, the medical reports, the photographs, the testimony from medical experts about the severity of the abuse, her defense became increasingly untenable. Her lawyer eventually convinced her to accept a plea deal. She would plead guilty to second-degree child abuse and unlawful restraint in exchange for a recommended sentence of 3 to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 2 years if she completed mandatory parenting classes and therapy. Zoey was not required to testify in court, which was a relief for everyone involved. She did meet with a victim advocate and with prosecutors to provide her statement, but she was spared the trauma of facing her mother in a courtroom. When told about the plea deal, Zoey had mixed feelings. Part of her was relieved that her mother would face consequences for what she'd done. Part of her was devastated that her mother was going to prison, that their relationship might be permanently broken. And part of her just felt numb, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the past months. "Is it wrong that I still miss her sometimes?" Zoey asked Ms. Harper during one of her visits to the Henderson home. They were sitting on the back porch, watching the birds at the feeder. Zoey had been in foster care for almost 2 months now, and she'd made remarkable progress in her physical recovery. The infections had healed, the bruises had faded, her ribs were mending. She'd started physical therapy and was slowly rebuilding her core strength. "It's not wrong at all," Ms. Harper said. "She's your mother. For all her faults, for all the harm she caused, she's still the person who raised you, who was the center of your world for 12 years. It's completely normal to miss her, even while being angry at her, even while knowing she hurt you. People are complicated. Feelings are complicated. There's no right or wrong way to feel about this." "The therapist says the same thing," Zoey said. "She says I can love my mom and hate what she did at the same time. She says I can be sad about losing my family, even while being relieved that I'm safe now. She says all my feelings are valid." "Your therapist sounds very smart," Ms. Harper said with a smile. "I had my first physical therapy session this week where I didn't cry," Zoey said, changing the subject slightly. "The therapist said my flexibility is coming back better than she expected. She said I'm working really hard." "That's wonderful," Ms. Harper said warmly. "I'm so proud of you." The Hendersons asked if I wanted to try some different activities, Zoey continued. "Not ballet, other things. Rachel showed me this website about art classes for kids, and Tom suggested maybe I'd like to try soccer or swimming, just for fun, nothing competitive. I think I might try art. I've never done that before." "That sounds perfect," Ms. Harper encouraged. "You should explore, try new things, figure out what makes you happy without any pressure attached to it." "Do you think I'll ever want to dance again?" Zoey asked suddenly, voicing the question that had clearly been bothering her. "Really dance, I mean. Not because someone's making me or because I have to be perfect, but just because I want to." "I think maybe someday you will," Ms. Harper said thoughtfully. "Maybe not tomorrow or next month or even next year, but I think eventually you'll be able to separate what your mother did from what ballet meant to you before all that. And if you decide you want to try it again, on your own terms, with no auditions or pressure or expectations, then maybe you'll find that love for it again. Or maybe you won't, and that's okay too. You're allowed to leave it behind if that's what you need." Zoey nodded, processing this. "Miss Elena, my old ballet teacher, she sent me a card. The Hendersons gave it to me last week. She said she was so sorry, that she had no idea what was happening, that if I ever wanted to talk to her about anything, I could. She said her door was always open, not for lessons necessarily, but just if I needed someone who understood that part of my life." "That was kind of her," Miss Harper said. "Do you want to see her?" "Maybe eventually," Zoey said. "I'm not ready yet, but maybe someday." As the months passed, Zoey continued to heal and grow. She threw herself into schoolwork with the dedication she'd once reserved for ballet, discovering that she was actually quite good at science and particularly loved biology. She joined the art club and found that she had a talent for watercolors, creating pieces that were beautiful and expressive. She made friends cautiously at first, but then more easily as she learned to trust again, to believe that people could care about her without wanting to control her. The Hendersons had petitioned to become her permanent guardians, and the process was moving forward with CPS's full support. Grace Marshall had been sentenced to 4 years in prison and was currently serving her time at a women's correctional facility about 3 hours away. She'd written several letters to Zoey, which Zoey had decided not to read yet. They were kept in a box in her closet, waiting for whenever she might be ready to face them. Her therapist said there was no rush, that she could engage with her mother's communications on her own timeline when and if she ever felt emotionally prepared. On a warm spring afternoon, almost exactly 1 year after Ms. Harper had first noticed Zoey refusing to sit in class, Ms. Harper received a text message asking her to come to the Henderson home for a special occasion. When she arrived, she found Zoey waiting on the front porch, practically vibrating with excitement. "I have something to show you," Zoey said, grabbing Ms. Harper's hand and pulling her inside. In the living room, Tom and Rachel were beaming. On the coffee table sat a large folder. "Open it," Zoey urged. Inside were official documents, finalized adoption papers. The Hendersons had officially, legally adopted Zoey. She was now Zoey Henderson, permanently part of their family. No longer in foster care, no longer in limbo, but truly, legally, permanently home. Miss Harper felt tears spring to her eyes as she looked at the papers, then at Zoey's radiant face, then at the Hendersons who were looking at their new daughter with such obvious love. "This is incredible," she managed to say. "I'm so happy for you." "They asked me if I wanted to change my middle name too," Zoey said excitedly, "since I was getting a new last name anyway, and I chose Harper. My full name is now Zoey Harper Henderson, after you, because you saved me. You saw me when no one else did, and I want to carry that with me always." Ms. Harper couldn't hold back the tears anymore. She pulled Zoey into a hug, careful as always of her still healing body, though most of the physical damage had long since mended. "You saved yourself," Ms. Harper whispered. "You survived. You were so brave. I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it." "You opened the door," Zoey agreed, pulling back to look at her former teacher, her forever friend, in the face. "But that was everything. If you hadn't noticed, if you hadn't cared enough to ask questions, to push when I tried to shut you out, I might still be wearing that thing, or worse. So thank you. Thank you for seeing me." They celebrated that evening with cake and laughter and stories, the Henderson family plus Ms. Harper, now bound together by circumstance and choice, by trauma overcome and healing embraced. As Ms. Harper drove home later that night, she felt a profound sense of gratitude for her profession, for the privilege of being allowed into children's lives, for the opportunity to make a difference in moments that mattered. She thought about all the teachers out there, all the adults who interacted with children daily, and she wished she could tell them all to trust their instincts, to notice the small things, to ask the uncomfortable questions, to not assume that everything was fine just because a child said so, because sometimes children lie to protect themselves or to protect the adults who are hurting them. Sometimes children hide pain behind smiles and excuses and carefully constructed walls. And sometimes, just sometimes, one observant adult asking one concerned question could change the entire trajectory of a child's life. 2 years after that first day when Miss Harper noticed Zoey standing instead of sitting, Zoey stood on a different stage entirely. Not a ballet recital, though she had eventually returned to dance in a casual, recreational class where she enjoyed the movement without the pressure. This stage was at the community center, where she was giving a presentation as part of a youth advocacy program. She'd become passionate about raising awareness about child abuse, particularly the kind that hid behind the mask of parenting or training or discipline. Ms. Harper sat in the audience, watching this confident 14-year-old speak eloquently about her experience, about the signs people should watch for, about the importance of speaking up when something feels wrong. Zoey had transformed her trauma into purpose, her pain into power to help others. She spoke about her mother not with hatred, but with compassion tinged with sadness, acknowledging the complexity of their relationship while being clear about the harm that had been done. "My mother loved me," Zoey said to the audience. "I believe that. But her love was twisted by her own unfulfilled dreams, by her obsession with success, by her belief that suffering builds character. She convinced herself that hurting me was helping me. And that's what makes this kind of abuse so insidious. It doesn't look like abuse from the outside. It looks like dedication, like a parent pushing their child to excel. But there's a line between encouraging excellence and enforcing perfection through pain. And crossing that line is abuse, no matter how it's justified." The audience was silent, riveted. Zoey continued, "I want everyone here to understand that if you see a child who seems off, who's behaving strangely, who's isolated or in pain or scared, please don't ignore it. Please ask questions. Please care enough to look deeper, because I'm only here, I'm only recovered and healing and able to tell this story because one teacher noticed that I wouldn't sit down. One teacher cared enough to investigate. One teacher refused to accept my excuses and insisted on the truth. That saved my life. Your attention, your concern, your willingness to get involved even when it's uncomfortable. That could save a life, too." After the presentation, dozens of people approached Zoey to thank her, to share their own stories, to ask for advice or resources. Miss Harper watched with pride as Zoey handled each person with grace and empathy. This remarkable young woman who had emerged from such darkness into such light. When the crowd finally cleared and they were walking to the parking lot together, Zoey turned to Miss Harper with a thoughtful expression. "You know what's weird? Sometimes I'm grateful for what happened. Not glad it happened, obviously. I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone. But grateful because it made me who I am now. It gave me purpose. It taught me resilience. It showed me who really cares about me. Does that make sense?" "It makes perfect sense," Miss Harper said. "You don't have to be glad something bad happened to be grateful for who you became because of it. That's not the same thing at all. You took something terrible and you alchemized it into something meaningful. That's not about being grateful for the abuse. That's about being proud of yourself for how you responded to it." Zoey smiled, that open, genuine smile that had replaced the tight, controlled expression she'd worn throughout her ordeal. "I'm going to keep doing this," she said. "The advocacy work. Maybe make it a career someday. Social work or child psychology or something. So I can help other kids the way people helped me." "You'll be amazing at whatever you choose to do," Ms. Harper said with certainty. "You already are amazing." They hugged goodbye in the parking lot. No longer teacher and student, but friends bound by a shared experience that had changed both their lives. As Miss Harper drove home, she thought about the title of Zoey's presentation, Seen and Saved, How One Observation Changed Everything. It was true. One observation had changed everything, but it wasn't magic. It wasn't luck. It was attention. It was caring. It was the willingness to trust instinct and ask difficult questions, and refuse to look away from discomfort. Every child deserves to be seen. Really seen. Not just glanced at or monitored or supervised, but truly observed with eyes that look for the details, the changes, the signs that something might be wrong. Every child deserves adults in their life who care enough to notice when they're in pain, when they're scared, when they're suffering in silence. Because sometimes the smallest observation can save a child's entire world. If you found Zoe's story moving and want more educational content like this that raises awareness about important issues, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share it with friends, family, teachers, anyone who works with children or cares about child welfare. Leave a comment below about where you're watching from or share your thoughts on how we can all be more observant and protective of the children in our communities. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people and potentially help more kids. Hit that notification bell so you never miss content that matters. Together we can create a world where every child is seen, heard, and protected.